The blizzard hit the Nevada territory with a fury that reminded Octavia Jensen of the night her husband had died. Though this time the cold came from the heavens instead of from the barrel of an outlaw's gun. She clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stumbled through the knee-deep snow, her boots already soaked through, her fingers numb despite being tucked beneath her arms. The small mining camp of Silver Creek had been her destination, but the storm had descended so quickly that she had lost her way an hour ago, maybe two. Time had become as impossible to track as the road beneath the relentless white. Her breath came in sharp gasps that burned her lungs. At 24 years old, she had already buried a husband and lost a child to fever. The townspeople of Carson City had looked at her with pity that had slowly transformed into suspicion when she had failed to remarry within a proper mourning period. A widow without family, without means, without prospects. That was what the ladies at the church had whispered behind their gloved hands, when the boarding house owner had told her that her room was needed for a paying guest. Octavia had known what that meant. She had packed her single carpetbag and left before dawn, heading toward Silver Creek where her late husband's brother supposedly ran a general store. Whether he would welcome her or turn her away remained to be seen, but it was the only thread of hope she had left to grasp. Now even that thread seemed likely to snap as the wind howled around her, and the snow fell so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and cold. She had read stories of people freezing to death in storms like this, of how they simply lay down in the snow and never rose again. The temptation to rest, just for a moment, pulled at her with surprising strength. Then through the white curtain ahead, she saw a dark shape. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks, but as she forced herself forward, the shape solidified into a structure. A cabin, sturdy and square, with smoke rising from a chimney. Relief flooded through her with such intensity that she nearly sobbed. She stumbled toward it, her feet catching in the deep drifts, and she fell hard onto her hands and knees just feet from the porch steps. The door swung open before she could rise. A man stood silhouetted against the warm glow of firelight from within. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and for a moment he simply stared down at her. Then he was moving, boots crunching in the snow as he descended the steps and hauled her up with strong hands beneath her arms. "Good Lord, woman, how long have you been out in this?" His voice was deep, rough as gravel but not unkind. He half carried, half dragged her up the steps and through the door, kicking it shut behind them against the wind. The warmth of the cabin hit Octavia like a physical force. She swayed on her feet, and the man guided her toward a chair near the fireplace. She collapsed into it, shaking so violently that her teeth chattered together. Through blurred vision, she looked up at her rescuer properly for the first time. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a beard that needed trimming. His eyes were a striking shade of gray, watchful and intelligent. He wore a simple homespun shirt and canvas trousers, both well worn but clean. Even in her dazed state, Octavia noticed the gun belt hanging by the door and the rifle mounted above the mantel. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, already moving toward a trunk in the corner. "You will catch your death otherwise." Octavia found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I cannot. It would not be proper." The man turned back to her, one dark eyebrow raised. "Proper does not mean much when you are freezing, madam. I will give you privacy. There is a blanket here and some dry clothes that might fit well enough. Get changed and wrap yourself up. I will be tending to the horses in the lean-to." He dropped the items on a nearby table and reached for a heavy coat by the door. "Do not argue, just do it." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing firmly behind him. Octavia sat there for a long moment, still shaking, before the cold radiating from her soaked dress convinced her that modesty was indeed less important than survival. With trembling fingers, she peeled off her wet things and pulled on the shirt and trousers he had left. They were far too large, clearly his own clothes, but they were dry and warm from being near the fire. She wrapped the thick woolen blanket around herself and settled back into the chair, tucking her bare feet beneath her. The cabin was small but well kept. A bed occupied one corner, neatly made with what looked like a quilt sewn in a wedding ring pattern. The fireplace dominated one wall, with a few pots and a skillet hanging beside it. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat near a small window, currently shuttered against the storm. Shelves held supplies, books, and a few personal items she could not quite make out in the flickering firelight. The door opened again, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air. The man entered, shaking snow from his shoulders. He hung his coat and turned to study her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." Octavia pulled the blanket tighter. "I am sorry to impose upon you like this. I lost my way in the storm. Lucky you found this place." He moved to the fireplace and added another log, then hung a kettle on the hook to heat. "Name is Asher Reeves. This is my land, such as it is." "Octavia Jensen," she hesitated. "Mrs. Octavia Jensen. I am a widow." Something flickered across his face too quickly for her to read. "Coffee will be ready soon. You look like you could use something hot." They sat in awkward silence while the kettle heated. Octavia studied him from beneath her lashes, trying to determine what manner of man he was. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in solitude, but there was a gentleness in how he had handled her, a care that spoke of decency. Still, she was alone with a stranger in the wilderness, and propriety aside, she needed to understand her situation. "How far is Silver Creek from here?" she asked. Asher looked up from where he was measuring coffee grounds into tin cups. "About 8 miles northeast." "You were heading in roughly the right direction, but you would never have made it in this storm. This valley gets hit hard when the weather turns. The wind funnels through the mountains and just sits here." He poured hot water over the grounds. "What business do you have in Silver Creek?" "My late husband's brother runs a store there. I am hoping he might offer me employment, or at least assistance in finding some." The words tasted bitter. She hated having to rely on the charity of others, but circumstances had left her no choice. Asher handed her one of the cups. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she was acutely aware of how rough and calloused his hands were. Working hands. "What was your husband's trade?" "He was a surveyor. He was shot during a robbery 2 years ago in California. We were living in Sacramento at the time." The familiar ache settled in her chest, though it was duller now than it had been. Grief had a way of wearing itself out eventually. "I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but they sounded genuine. "And you have been on your own since then." "I worked as a seamstress for a time, then at a boarding house. But work is scarce for women, especially those without family to vouch for them." She sipped the coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "I apologize. You do not need to hear my troubles. You are stuck here until the storm passes." "Might as well talk." He settled into the other chair, cradling his own cup. "This weather could last a day or 3. The valley does not let go easy once it gets its teeth in. 3 days. The words hung in the air between them. 3 days alone with a man she did not know in a cabin miles from anywhere. If word got out, what little reputation she had left would be destroyed. But then again, who would know? And what choice did she have? As if reading her thoughts, Asher said, "I will not compromise your honor, Mrs. Jensen. You can have the bed. I will sleep by the fire. When the storm clears, I will take you to Silver Creek myself." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. You are very kind. Just practical." He stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down supplies. "You are likely hungry. I have salt pork and beans. Nothing fancy, but it will fill you up." While he prepared the food, Octavia found herself watching him more closely. He moved with practiced efficiency, a man used to caring for himself. She noticed details, the careful way he measured portions, suggesting supplies were precious. The mended tear in his shirt sleeve, the stitches small and neat, done by his own hand most likely. The way he kept glancing toward the shuttered window, as if checking on the storm even though he could not see through the closed boards. "Have you lived here long?" she asked. 4 years come spring. I have a small herd of cattle, do some trapping, pan for gold when the creeks are running. It is not much, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from building something from nothing. "It must be lonely," he shrugged, stirring the pot. "Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. I chose this life. You do not go into town, for supplies or for company. Every few months. I am not much for crowds." He ladled beans and pork onto 2 tin plates and brought one to her. "Most folks do not understand why a man would want to live out here alone. They think there is something wrong with me." Octavia accepted the plate. "I think there is something to be said for choosing your own path, even if others do not understand it, perhaps especially if they do not understand it." Asher looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You speak from experience." "I wanted to work, to support myself. After my husband died, people expected me to find another man quickly, to remarry and return to being properly cared for. When I tried to make my own way instead, they treated me as if I was doing something shameful." She had not meant to say so much, but something about this quiet man invited confession. "Folks have strong opinions about how others should live," Asher said. "Especially about women. My mother wanted me to take over her brother's shipping business in San Francisco. When I came out here instead, she stopped writing. That was 3 years ago." They ate in companionable silence. The food was simple but good, and Octavia realized she had not eaten since early that morning. Outside, the wind continued to howl, rattling the shutters. The fire crackled warmly. Despite the strangeness of her situation, Octavia felt safer than she had in months. After they ate, Asher washed the plates while Octavia remained wrapped in her blanket. Her dress and undergarments hung near the fire to dry, a sight that made her blush despite the practicality of it. She found herself studying him again as he worked. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way. Not like her late husband James, who had been slight and scholarly, always with ink stains on his fingers. Asher looked like he could break a man in half if needed, yet he moved around the small cabin with surprising grace. "You said you chose this life," Octavia ventured. "But did something drive you to make that choice?" Asher's hand stilled in the wash basin. For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I was a cavalry scout for 2 years. Saw things, did things that did not sit right with my soul. When my enlistment was up, I knew I could not go back to city life, could not pretend to be the same person I was before. I needed space. Quiet. A place where I could figure out who I was supposed to be. Did you figure it out, still working on it?" He dried his hands and turned to face her. "But I sleep better out here than I ever did in a feather bed in San Francisco. That has to count for something." The conversation drifted to easier topics. He told her about the land, about the deer and elk that moved through the valley, about the creek that ran behind the cabin and teemed with trout in summer. She told him about her childhood in Illinois, about learning to sew from her grandmother, about the journey west with James that had been filled with such hope and promise. As the evening wore on, exhaustion crept over Octavia like a heavy blanket. She found herself struggling to keep her eyes open. Asher noticed and stood. "You should rest. Take the bed. I mean what I said about keeping my distance." She was too tired to argue. He turned his back while she shed the borrowed clothes and climbed beneath the quilts in her chemise. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the quilts heavy and warm. She noticed they smelled faintly of sage and wood smoke, clean, masculine scents that were not unpleasant. "Mr. Reeves," she called softly. He turned, his expression carefully neutral in the firelight. "Yes, thank you for your kindness. You saved my life tonight." Something softened in his eyes. "Sleep well, Mrs. Jensen." She closed her eyes, listening to him settle near the fire, the rustle of blankets as he made his own bed on the floor. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin it was warm and safe. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she felt more at peace than she had since James died, and she was not quite sure what to make of that. Morning came with pale gray light seeping through the cracks in the shutters. Octavia woke slowly, disoriented until memory returned. The cabin. The storm. Asher Reeves. She sat up carefully, clutching the quilt to her chest, and looked toward the fireplace. Asher was already awake, crouched by the hearth and building up the fire. He must have heard her movement because he glanced over his shoulder. "Morning. Storm is still going strong. I will make breakfast shortly." Octavia realized her dress was still too damp to wear. She felt exposed, vulnerable, though Asher kept his gaze respectfully averted. "I apologize. I have nothing suitable to wear. Keep the clothes from yesterday. They suit you well enough for now." He stood and moved to the shelves. "Your dress should be dry by this afternoon." She retreated to the bed while he prepared cornmeal mush and fried salt pork. The domesticity of the scene struck her as surreal. Here she was, trapped by a blizzard in a stranger's cabin, wearing his clothes, about to share breakfast with him as if they were old friends or something more intimate. If anyone from Carson City could see her now, they would faint dead away from the scandal. Yet there was no scandal, not really. Asher treated her with perfect respect. If anything, he was too careful, keeping well away from her, averting his eyes whenever she moved around the cabin. She found herself both grateful and oddly disappointed by his distance. After breakfast, the day stretched ahead with little to fill it. The storm showed no signs of abating. Asher explained that he needed to check on his cattle, 3 cows and a bull that he kept in a small barn about 50 yards from the cabin. He bundled up in his heavy coat and tied a rope around his waist. "What is the rope for?" Octavia asked. "So I can find my way back. In a storm like this, a man can get turned around in seconds. The rope stays tied to the cabin door. As long as I follow it, I can make it back." He pulled on heavy gloves. "Keep the fire going. I will be back soon." She watched through a crack in the shutters as he disappeared into the white. Fear clutched at her chest. The world beyond the cabin was nothing but swirling snow and screaming wind. How could anyone survive in that? Time crawled by. She tended the fire, paced the small space, tried not to imagine Asher lost in the storm. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the door burst open and he staggered in, covered in snow and ice. Octavia rushed to him without thinking, helping him shed his frozen coat, brushing snow from his hair and shoulders. "Are you all right? I was so worried." He looked down at her, his gray eyes startled. They stood very close, her hands still on his shoulders, his breath coming in white puffs between them. For a moment neither moved, then Asher stepped back carefully. "I am fine. Cows are fine too, plenty of hay to keep them fed." He moved away from her, creating distance. "This storm is worse than I thought. We might be here longer than 3 days." The words should have alarmed her, but instead Octavia felt a strange flutter in her stomach. More time here with him. It should have been a burden, an inconvenience. So why did it feel almost like relief? The day passed slowly. They talked, sharing stories and histories. Octavia learned that Asher was 31 years old, that he had grown up in San Francisco as the only child of a wealthy family, that he had disappointed them by choosing the frontier over civilization. He had been engaged once, to a girl his mother had chosen, but she had broken it off when he refused to take up his expected position in his uncle's business. She said I was throwing away my future, Asher told her, staring into the fire. Maybe she was right. Maybe this is a waste of a life. Do you think it is? Octavia asked. No. I think I am exactly where I am supposed to be, but that does not stop people from having their opinions. People always have opinions, Octavia said with feeling, especially about lives they do not have to live themselves. In turn, she told him about her marriage to James, how they had met at a church social when she was 18 and he was 25, how he had courted her with poetry and promises of adventure, how they had traveled west together, full of dreams about the new territory, how those dreams had died on a Sacramento street when a thief's bullet had torn through James's chest. I held him while he died, she said quietly. He kept trying to tell me something, but the blood filled his mouth. I never knew what he wanted to say. Asher reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. The gesture was simple, comforting, and it made Octavia's eyes sting with tears she had thought long dried up. I am sorry, he said. No one should have to bear that alone. I had no choice. His family was back east, and they never approved of me anyway. They thought I was beneath him, she laughed bitterly. Maybe they were right. Maybe if he had married someone more suitable, he would still be alive. You cannot think that way. What happened to your husband was not your fault. I know that here, she touched her head. But knowing and feeling are different things. They sat in silence, hands still clasped. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something warm and fragile was building between them, delicate as spun glass. The second day brought no relief from the weather. Asher ventured out again to tend the cattle, and again Octavia waited anxiously for his return. When he came back, snow-covered and half-frozen, she had hot coffee ready and insisted he sit close to the fire until the chill left his bones. You are going to wear yourself out, she scolded. Those cows will be fine for a few hours. They are my livelihood. I cannot afford to lose them. But he accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his large hands around the cup. Octavia found herself studying those hands, noticing the scars across his knuckles, the calluses on his palms. Working hands, she had thought before, but also gentle hands. Hands that had pulled her from the snow and asked nothing in return. What are you thinking about? Asher asked suddenly. She startled, realizing she had been staring. I was thinking that you are a good man, Mr. Reeves. Better than many I have known. He looked uncomfortable with the compliment. I am just doing what anyone would do. No, you are doing what few would do. Most men would have taken advantage of this situation. You have been nothing but honorable. Did you expect less? His tone was curious, not offended. I did not know what to expect. I have learned that people often surprise you and not always pleasantly. She set down her own cup. You have surprised me in the best possible way. Something shifted in his expression. He leaned forward slightly, and for a heart-stopping moment Octavia thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stood abruptly and crossed to the window, peering out at the storm. We should think about conserving supplies, he said, his voice carefully neutral. If this keeps up much longer, we will need to ration. Octavia felt the loss of the moment like a physical ache. She had wanted him to kiss her, she realized with a start, wanted to feel his arms around her, his mouth on hers. The realization shocked her. She had been widowed for 2 years, and in that time she had not looked at another man with interest. Yet here she was, trapped in a cabin with a virtual stranger, and all she could think about was how much she wanted him to touch her. This was madness. She barely knew him. The situation was simply playing tricks on her emotions, creating false intimacy through forced proximity. That was all it was. It had to be. But as the day wore on, Octavia found it harder and harder to convince herself of that. She watched Asher as he went about small tasks around the cabin, mending a harness, checking his rifle, sorting through supplies. She noticed the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the concentration on his face when he worked, the rare smiles that transformed his usually serious expression. Each detail etched itself into her memory. That evening, they sat together by the fire again. Asher had produced a worn deck of cards and taught her a gambling game he had learned from a card sharp in Denver. Octavia found herself laughing more than she had in months as they played for matches, making ridiculous wagers and accusations of cheating. "You are hiding cards in your sleeve," Asher accused with mock severity. "I am certain of it. I am wearing your shirt, which is 3 sizes too large. I could hide an entire deck in these sleeves." She pulled the cuffs over her hands to demonstrate, grinning at him. He grinned back, and the expression stole her breath. He should smile more often, she thought. It made him devastatingly handsome. The moment stretched between them, smiles fading as something more serious took hold. Asher's eyes darkened, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Octavia," he said softly. It was the first time he had used her given name. "Yes, if circumstances were different, if we had met in town properly with time to court the way we should. Would you have given me a chance?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes, I think I would have. Even knowing I live out here away from civilization, that I have nothing to offer but a rough cabin and a hard life, you have more to offer than you know, Asher." She turned her face into his palm. "You have kindness, integrity, strength. Those things matter more than fine houses or social position." He closed his eyes as if her words caused him pain. "You deserve better than this, better than a man hiding from the world in the wilderness. I think you are the one who does not see clearly. You are not hiding. You are living honestly, on your own terms. That takes courage." She covered his hand with hers. "I have been surrounded by so-called respectable people who were cruel beneath their manners. Give me honest solitude over hypocritical society any day." Asher opened his eyes and looked at her with such longing that it made her ache. "If I kiss you now, I will not be able to pretend this is just about the storm. I will not be able to let you go when the weather clears." "Then kiss me," she whispered, "and we will face what comes after together." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle at first, almost hesitant. Then Octavia made a soft sound and leaned into him, and the kiss deepened. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she went willingly, her hands fisting in his shirt. Time seemed to stop. There was only the warmth of his mouth, the strength of his arms, the thundering of her own heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Octavia felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. Octavia. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I cannot offer you an easy life, but I can offer you honesty and partnership. I can offer you respect and whatever future we build together. If you will have me, if you will stay when the storm ends, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Tears pricked her eyes. "You already are worthy, and yes, I will stay, if you truly want me. Want you. I have wanted you since I pulled you from the snow." I just did not think I had the right to say it." He kissed her again, fierce and claiming, "Stay with me, be my wife, help me build a life here." "Yes," she breathed between kisses. "Yes to all of it." They held each other as the fire burned low and the storm continued its assault on the valley outside. For the first time since James died, Octavia felt hope stir in her chest. Not the desperate hope of someone searching for survival, but the warm, steady hope of someone who had found home. The third day of the storm brought a shift in the weather. The wind began to die down, though snow still fell. Asher made his way out to the cattle and reported that the worst seemed to be passing. "Another day or two, and the storm will blow itself out," he said. "Then we will have to dig our way to town." "About that," Octavia began, suddenly nervous. "Do we have to go to Silver Creek right away?" Asher paused in removing his coat. "You have changed your mind about finding your husband's brother." "I have changed my mind about needing him. If I am staying here with you, then I would rather we had time to ourselves before dealing with explanations and questions." He crossed to her, gathering her into his arms. "We have all the time you want, but eventually people will need to know. I will not have you living here without the protection of marriage. Your reputation matters." "My reputation is already in tatters," Octavia pointed out. "I have been alone with you for 3 days. No one needs to know that. We will say you arrived just before we went to town. That we were properly chaperoned the entire time. I will not have people saying cruel things about you." His protectiveness warmed her. "What will people say about you marrying a widow you barely know? Let them say what they want. I know my own mind." He tilted her chin up. "Though I suppose we should take a bit of time to be sure. I do not want you feeling rushed into this because of circumstances." Over the next 2 days, as the storm finally began to clear, they talked about everything. Their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Octavia learned that Asher's apparent gruffness hid a thoughtful nature and a dry sense of humor. He learned that, beneath her proper manners, she had a stubborn streak a mile wide and opinions on everything from politics to the best way to bake bread. They also learned each other's touch. Tentative at first, then growing bolder. Kisses by the fire that stretched into long, heated embraces. Asher's hands learning the curve of her waist, the softness of her hair. Octavia's fingers tracing the muscles of his shoulders, the roughness of his jaw. They did not go further than kisses and caresses, both agreeing that marriage should come first, but the promise of more hung between them like sweet anticipation. On the 5th day, the sun finally broke through the clouds. The valley lay buried under several feet of snow, pristine and blinding white. Asher dug a path to the barn while Octavia stood on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching him work. The sight of him, strong and capable, made her heart swell with affection. When he finished, he came to stand beside her, both of them gazing out at the transformed landscape. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said. "Yes, dangerous but beautiful. Like life out here, nothing is easy, but the rewards are worth the struggle." He looked down at her. "Are you certain, Octavia? Truly certain you want this life?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I am certain I want you. The life comes with that, and I welcome it. I am tired of being afraid, tired of depending on others' charity. Here with you I can be a partner, an equal. That is worth any hardship. Then we ride to Silver Creek tomorrow. We will find a preacher and make this official. No long engagement, no waiting. I want you as my wife, Octavia Jensen, and I see no reason to delay." "No reason at all," she agreed, stretching up to kiss him. They spent the rest of that day preparing for the journey. Octavia's dress had finally dried completely, though it was wrinkled and worn. She looked at it with distaste. "I cannot get married in this. I look like a beggar." Asher studied her thoughtfully, then went to his trunk and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. My mother sent this 2 years ago for my birthday. I never opened it. I think it might be clothing she thought I needed. He handed it to her. See if there is anything useful. Octavia unwrapped the package carefully. Inside, she found a fine linen shirt, clearly made for a man, and beneath it, wrapped in tissue, a dress. She lifted it out and gasped. It was simple but beautiful, deep blue wool with black trim, well made and fashionable. "Why would your mother send you a dress?" she asked, confused. She probably thought I would eventually come to my senses, return to San Francisco, and marry the girl she chose for me. She likely sent it as a gift for my theoretical bride. He shrugged. It has been sitting in that trunk ever since. I think it would be better used on my actual bride, do not you? Octavia held the dress against herself. It looked like it might fit, though she would need to let down the hem. Are you certain? This was meant for someone else. It was meant for someone who does not exist. You are real. You are mine. Wear it and be happy. He kissed her forehead. My mother would probably be horrified that I am marrying a widow I met in a snowstorm, but that is her problem, not ours. That evening, Octavia altered the dress by firelight while Asher cleaned his rifle and checked his saddle. Domestic tasks, but they felt significant. The first of many evenings they would spend this way, she thought, building a life together one small moment at a time. "Tell me about your plans for this place," she said as she worked. "What do you want to build?" Asher looked up from oiling leather. "More cattle eventually. There is good grazing land here in summer. I thought about running sheep too, though cattle folk and sheep folk do not always get along. Maybe some chickens, a proper vegetable garden. The cabin could use expanding. Another room at least, maybe two. For children?" Octavia asked softly, his hands stilled. "Would you want that? Children? I had a daughter," she said quietly. "With James. She died of fever when she was 6 months old. Her name was Sarah. After James died, I thought I would never have that chance again. But yes, I would want children, if we are blessed with them." Asher set aside the saddle and came to kneel beside her chair. "I did not know about your daughter. I am sorry. It was a long time ago. The pain is not as sharp anymore, but the love does not fade." She touched his face. "I think Sarah would have liked you." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "Then we will build rooms for the children we might have. We will expand the cabin and fill it with life. We will make a home here, Octavia. A real home." They made love that night for the first time, unable to wait for the formality of marriage vows. It felt right, sacred in its own way. Asher was gentle, worshipful, learning her body with reverent attention. Octavia gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. When they finally came together, it felt like a homecoming, like finding a missing piece of herself she had not known was lost. Afterwards, lying tangled in the quilts, Asher held her close and whispered promises against her hair. "Forever," he said. "Always." His until the stars burned out, and Octavia believed him, believed in the future they would build together. Morning came cold and clear. They dressed carefully, Octavia in the altered blue dress, Asher in his best shirt and cleanest trousers. He saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Jack, and helped Octavia mount. She sat in front of him, his arms around her as he held the reins, her back against his chest. The position was intimate, secure, and she felt utterly safe despite the treacherous snow. The ride to Silver Creek took most of the day. The storm had transformed the landscape into something alien and difficult to navigate. Several times they had to detour around impassable drifts. Asher handled it all with calm competence, and Octavia found herself relaxing into his strength, trusting him to get them there safely. They reached Silver Creek just as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The small mining town was built along a creek that would be rushing with snowmelt come spring. Now it was frozen solid, a ribbon of ice cutting through the settlement. Rough buildings lined the main street, and smoke rose from chimneys. Octavia could see the general store, a saloon, what looked like a boarding house, and at the far end, a small church with a modest steeple. "There," Asher said, pointing to the church. "We will try there first." They rode up to the church and dismounted. Asher helped Octavia down, his hands lingering at her waist. Inside, they found a middle-aged man in minister's clothing sweeping the floor. He looked up at their entrance, his round face creasing into a smile. "Good evening. I am Reverend Thomas Michaels. Can I help you?" Asher removed his hat. "We would like to be married, Reverend, as soon as possible." Reverend Michaels looked between them, his expression sharpening with interest. "I see. Are you both of age, free to marry?" "I am 31 and she is 24. She is a widow. I have never been married." Asher's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Well, that is all in order then, though it is unusual to perform a marriage so quickly. Do you have witnesses?" "We can find witnesses," Octavia said. "Please, Reverend, we have waited long enough. We do not want to wait any more." Something in her voice must have moved him because his expression softened. "Very well. Let me get my wife to serve as a witness. If you can find one more person, we can proceed." They waited while the Reverend fetched his wife, a plump woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Martha Michaels. For the second witness, they recruited the owner of the general store, a man named Henry Porter who happened to be closing up shop next door. "You are the widow?" Henry asked Octavia, studying her with sharp eyes. "James Jensen was your husband." Octavia's heart sank. "You knew him?" "My brother wrote to me about a widow who might be coming to stay. He runs a store in Sacramento, said James's widow was in need of assistance." Henry looked her up and down. "Did not expect you to show up with a husband already lined up. Mr. Porter, I do not know what your brother told you, but I assure you I am not seeking charity. Mr. Reeves and I wish to marry. That is all." Henry held up his hands. "No judgment from me, madam. You are a grown woman. You can make your own choices. I will stand witness for you gladly. Anyone willing to make a life in this territory has my respect." The ceremony was simple, conducted in the small church with only the 4 witnesses present. Octavia held Asher's hands and spoke her vows with complete certainty. When Asher slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he said had belonged to his grandmother, tears pricked her eyes. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Michaels said. "You may kiss your bride." Asher cupped her face between his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Octavia felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it. When they pulled apart, both smiling, Martha Michaels was wiping her eyes with her apron. "Beautiful," she sniffled. "Just beautiful. You must stay for supper. I insist." They accepted gratefully. Over a meal of venison stew and fresh bread, they answered questions about how they had met. Asher told the story simply. Octavia had been caught in the storm, sought shelter at his cabin, and they had discovered they suited each other during the days she was stranded there. It was the truth, just edited for propriety. Martha beamed at them. "How romantic, like something from a novel. A widow rescued from the storm by a handsome cowboy and they fall in love. It is perfect." Octavia caught Asher's eye across the table and saw the amusement there. "Yes," she agreed. "Perfect." After dinner, Reverend Michaels offered them a room at the church for the night, but Asher declined. "We have a long ride ahead tomorrow, back to the cabin. We should start early. We will stay at the boarding house tonight." The boarding house was clean but basic, a far cry from the elaborate hotels Octavia had seen in Sacramento. But the bed was soft, the room warm, and more importantly, It was theirs. Their wedding night, proper and legal now. Asher was even more tender than he had been before, worshipping her body like it was something precious and rare. Octavia responded with equal passion, giving and taking in turn, learning the rhythms of their joined life. When they finally lay tangled together in exhaustion, she felt more complete than she ever had, even in her first marriage. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I know it is fast, I know we barely know each other, but I love you, Asher Reeves." He tightened his arms around her. "I love you too. From the moment I saw you in the snow, something in me recognized you, as if I had been waiting my whole life without knowing what for, and then there you were." They talked late into the night about their plans, their dreams. Asher wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy the land adjacent to his valley. Octavia wanted to plant a garden that would put the town gardens to shame, wanted to learn to ride a horse properly, wanted to fill their expanded cabin with the sounds of children's laughter. The future stretched before them, challenging but full of possibility. The next morning they bought supplies in Silver Creek before heading back to the cabin. Henry Porter sold them flour, sugar, coffee, cloth for making curtains and clothes, seeds for the spring planting, and a dozen other necessities. He threw in a set of good kitchen knives as a wedding present. "You will need these," he said. "And if you ever need anything else, you know where to find me. We do not get many young couples settling in these parts. It is good for the town." The ride back to the cabin took most of the day again. Octavia rode behind Asher this time, her arms around his waist, her cheek resting against his back. She felt utterly content, at peace in a way she never had before. This was right. This life, this man, this choice, all of it right. When the cabin came into view, snow-covered and sturdy against the valley walls, Octavia felt a surge of affection. Home, she thought. This is home now. Asher helped her down and then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Carrying my bride over the threshold. It is tradition, is it not?" He carried her into the cabin and set her gently on her feet. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves. Mrs. Reeves," she repeated, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." They settled into married life with surprising ease. The cabin that had seemed so small now felt cozy, a refuge against the harsh winter still gripping the valley. They fell into comfortable rhythms. Asher tending the cattle and doing outdoor chores, Octavia managing the cabin and preparing meals, both of them working together on projects like planning the expansion and preparing for spring. Winter slowly gave way to early spring. The snow began to melt, and the valley transformed again, this time into a muddy morass that made travel difficult. Asher worked on building a chicken coop while Octavia sewed curtains for the cabin windows and worked on making new clothes for both of them. She discovered she was pregnant in late April. The realization came gradually, missed courses and morning queasiness combining with a bone-deep certainty that a life was growing inside her. She waited until she was sure before telling Asher. He had been mending fence posts when she brought him water and the news. She watched his face carefully as she said, "I am with child. The baby should come around Christmas." For a moment he just stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled the cows and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. "Pleased." "Octavia, I am beyond pleased. I am ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic." He set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "You need to rest. You should not be carrying heavy things. I am pregnant, not fragile. Women work right up until they give birth. Not my wife. You will be careful. You will rest when you are tired. You will not lift anything heavy." His protectiveness was endearing even as it was slightly annoying. "Asher, I cannot sit idle for months. I will go mad." They compromised. Octavia continued her normal activities, but promised to rest more and let Asher handle the heavier tasks. As spring progressed into summer, her belly began to swell, and Asher's protectiveness only increased. He doted on her shamelessly, bringing her wildflowers, insisting she sit in the shade while he worked, making sure she ate well. "You are going to spoil me," she protested one afternoon as he presented her with fresh trout he had caught and cleaned specifically because she had mentioned a craving for fish. "That is my intention," he said unrepentantly. "You are carrying my child. You deserve to be spoiled." The cabin expansion began in earnest that summer. Asher hired 2 men from Silver Creek to help, and together they added 2 new rooms, one for the baby and one for storage. Octavia watched the cabin grow, feeling a fierce pride in what they were building together. In August, a letter arrived from San Francisco. Asher's mother had somehow learned of his marriage and was demanding details. The letter was cold, critical, full of questions about Octavia's family and background that were clearly meant to determine if she was suitable. Asher read it, his jaw tight with anger, then tossed it into the fire. "She has no say in my life anymore. I made my choice and I have never been happier." "You should write to her," Octavia said gently. "Tell her about the baby. She is going to be a grandmother. That might soften her heart. Or it might make her more critical." But he sat down that evening and penned a careful letter, telling his mother about the baby, about the ranch, about Octavia. He did not apologize for his choices, but he left the door open for reconciliation if she was willing. The reply, when it came weeks later, was slightly warmer. His mother was still not happy about the marriage, but the prospect of a grandchild had indeed softened her somewhat. She sent a package containing beautiful baby clothes and a christening gown that had been in the family for generations. It was a peace offering of sorts, and both Asher and Octavia accepted it in the spirit it was meant. Autumn came, painting the valley in golds and reds. Octavia's belly was round and prominent now, the baby active and strong. She felt wonderful, energetic despite her size, and Asher had finally relaxed enough to stop treating her like she might break. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Octavia felt the baby kick particularly hard. She grabbed Asher's hand and placed it on her stomach. "Feel that?" His eyes went wide as the baby kicked against his palm. "That is our child, inside you, alive and growing." Wonder filled his voice. "He or she is very active tonight. I think we have a fighter on our hands. Good. They will need to be strong to thrive out here." He kept his hand on her belly, feeling the movements. "What should we name the baby?" They had discussed names before but never settled on anything. Now Octavia said, "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my father, Robert. And if it is a girl, perhaps Lily after your grandmother." "Robert Reeves, Lily Reeves, both sound right." He leaned over to kiss her swollen belly. "We are so ready to meet you, little one, whenever you are ready to join us." The baby decided to arrive on a snowy December night, 2 weeks before Christmas. Octavia's labor started just after sunset, and Asher rode through the darkness to fetch Martha Michaels, who had experience as a midwife. By the time they returned, Octavia's contractions were coming hard and fast. Martha took charge with calm efficiency, sending Asher to boil water and gather clean cloths. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Asher stayed by Octavia's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. "I cannot," she gasped at one point, exhausted and in pain. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can. You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." He kissed her forehead. I am right here. I am not leaving. We will meet our baby soon." Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the baby arrived with a lusty cry. Martha laughed as she cleaned the infant and wrapped it in blankets. "You have a son, a big, healthy boy with excellent lungs." She placed the baby in Octavia's arms, and Octavia looked down at the red, squalling face in wonder. "Hello, Robert. Hello, my sweet boy." Asher leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect. You are both perfect." He touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when the little fingers curled around his. Martha stayed for 2 days to help Octavia recover and teach her about nursing and caring for the baby. Then she returned to Silver Creek, leaving the new family alone. Those first weeks were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Robert was a good baby overall, but he woke frequently to nurse and cried whenever he was hungry or uncomfortable. Asher proved to be a devoted father, taking over all the household tasks so Octavia could rest and focus on the baby. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Robert when he was fussy, and looked at his son with such love it made Octavia's heart ache. Christmas came quietly. They had no grand celebration, but Asher gave Octavia a beautiful necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in Silver Creek, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant engraved with their wedding date. She gave him a new coat she had sewn herself, lined with fur she had traded for in town. "Best Christmas of my life," Asher said, holding both his wife and his son. "This time last year I was alone. Now I have a family. I have everything." Winter passed into spring again, and Robert grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby. Octavia marveled at how quickly time moved, how much their lives had changed in just over a year. She had gone from a desperate widow with nowhere to turn to a wife and mother with a home and a future. When Robert was 6 months old, a wagon appeared in the valley one afternoon. Asher met it with his rifle, wary of strangers but relaxed when an older couple climbed down. The woman was elegant despite her travel-worn clothes, her gray hair perfectly styled. The man was distinguished, silver-haired and serious. "Mother, father," Asher's voice was shocked. His mother, Mrs. Catherine Reeves, looked around the valley with obvious disdain before her eyes landed on Octavia, who had emerged from the cabin with Robert in her arms. "So this is where you have been hiding. And this is the wife you chose without consulting your family." Asher's father, William Reeves, was more measured. "We received your letters, son. We thought it was time to see for ourselves how you are living." The visit was tense at first. Catherine Reeves was clearly unhappy with her son's choices and made no effort to hide her disappointment. But when Octavia placed Robert in her arms, something shifted. The baby smiled up at his grandmother, gurgling happily, and Catherine's stern expression softened. "He has your eyes, Asher," she said quietly, "and your father's chin. He is beautiful." Over the next few days, the ice slowly thawed. Catherine could not help but notice how clean and well-kept the cabin was, how happy Asher seemed, how devoted he and Octavia were to each other and their son. William spent time with Asher, helping with the cattle, and came away impressed with what his son had built from nothing. On their last evening, Catherine took Octavia aside. "I owe you an apology. I judged you without knowing you. I thought you were some opportunist who had trapped my son. I was wrong. He is happy, truly happy, perhaps for the first time in his life. You have given him that." "He has given me just as much," Octavia said. "He saved my life in more ways than one. I love him with everything I am." Catherine patted her hand. "I can see that. And I can see he loves you the same way. That is all a mother can truly want for her child. I am sorry I was not more welcoming." When they left the next morning, Catherine hugged Octavia warmly and promised to write. William shook Asher's hand and said, "You have done well, son. I am proud of you." After they left, Asher pulled Octavia close. "That went better than I expected. They love you. They just needed to see that this life makes you happy. This life and you, always you," he kissed her softly. "You are my everything, Octavia Reeves, my hope and my heart." The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered. Asher's herd grew, and they added sheep, despite the initial skepticism from neighboring ranchers. Octavia's gardens flourished, providing more than enough food for their family and surplus to trade in town. Robert grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere. When he was 3, Octavia gave birth to twin girls, Lily and Rose, who filled the cabin with their laughter and mischief. 2 years after that, another son arrived, James, named for Octavia's first husband. Asher had suggested the name, wanting to honor the man who had been part of making Octavia who she was. The cabin was expanded again, growing into a proper ranch house with several bedrooms, a large kitchen, and even a parlor for receiving the occasional guest. Asher built a schoolroom where Octavia taught the children to read and write. They hired hands to help with the cattle, and the valley became known as Reeves Valley, a thriving ranch in the heart of Nevada territory. Through it all, Asher and Octavia's love only deepened. They still stole moments alone when they could, riding out to a favorite spot by the creek or sitting together on the porch after the children were in bed. They still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt in those early days trapped together in the storm. "You ever regret it?" Asher asked her one evening as they sat watching the sun set over the mountains. They were in their 40s now, their hair starting to gray, their faces lined with years of hard work and laughter. Giving up the possibility of an easier life, Octavia looked at him in genuine surprise. "Never. Not once. How could I regret the best decision I ever made? Some women might have wanted more. Fine clothes, society, culture. I have everything I want right here. A husband who loves me, children who bring me joy, a home I helped build with my own hands. What more could anyone ask for?" She took his hand. "You saw beauty where everyone else saw burden, Asher. You gave me a chance when I had nothing to offer but myself. That is a gift I can never repay. You repay it every day just by being here, by choosing me over and over again." He raised her hand to his lips. "I love you more now than I did the day we married. I did not think that was possible, but here we are." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, hands clasped, hearts full. Behind them in the house, they could hear the children settling down for the night, their voices raised in play and argument and laughter. The sounds of a family, of a life built on love and hard work and determination. Robert was preparing to attend university in California, planning to study law so he could return and help the territory as it moved toward statehood. The twins were 12, already showing signs of becoming formidable women like their mother. Young James, at 8, was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book or making up elaborate stories. It was more than Octavia had ever dared to hope for, back in those dark days after James's death, when she had thought her life was over. Instead, it had been a new beginning, a second chance at happiness. The storm that had forced her into Asher's cabin had been a blessing in disguise, fate or providence or simple luck placing her exactly where she needed to be. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Asher asked suddenly. "When I offered you the bed, I said it would not be proper." Octavia smiled at the memory. "I was so worried about propriety even while freezing to death. I am glad you stopped worrying about that eventually." He pulled her closer. "Though I would have waited as long as you needed. Some things are worth waiting for." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, bright and clear in the Nevada sky. Then, hand in hand, they went inside to their home, their family, their life together. A life that had begun in a storm and grown into something beautiful beyond measure. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Nevada achieved statehood in 1864, and Robert came home from university to practice law in Carson City, eventually becoming a judge. Lily married a rancher from a neighboring valley, while Rose chose to remain at Reeves Valley, helping manage the ranch with a keen business sense that impressed everyone. James became a teacher, opening a school in Silver Creek that served children from the surrounding ranches. Asher and Octavia became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The ranch passed into Robert's capable hands as Asher's health began to fail in his 60s, though he remained active and engaged until the end. When he died peacefully in his sleep at 72, with Octavia holding his hand, he left behind a legacy of integrity and hard work. Octavia lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her. She spent her final years in the rocking chair on the porch, watching the valley that had become her home, telling stories about the blizzard that had changed her life, and the man who had seen her not as a burden but as a blessing. When she passed at 79, also peacefully in her sleep, she was buried beside Asher under the cottonwood tree they had planted together their first spring in the valley. Their children erected a simple headstone that read, Asher and Octavia Reeves, together in storm and in sunshine, forever. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants. The cabin where Octavia had first found shelter was preserved as a family treasure, maintained carefully through the generations. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would visit it, marveling at how small it was, how simple. Yet it had been the birthplace of a dynasty, the shelter where two souls had found each other against all odds. And on winter nights, when storms swept through the valley as fierce as the one that had brought Octavia to Asher's door, family members would gather in the big ranch house and tell the story. How a widow lost in a blizzard had stumbled upon a cowboy's cabin. How he had seen beauty where others saw only burden. How a forced proximity had become a choice, and then a love story for the ages. The story always ended the same way, with Asher and Octavia on that porch, hand in hand, watching the sunset over their valley. Two people who had been given a second chance and had built something lasting from it. A reminder that sometimes the hardest storms lead us exactly where we need to be, if only we are brave enough to stay and see what comes next.